has been terrorism, armed banditry, kidnapping, oil theft, secessionist agitations, and farmer headers clashes. The threat dynamics were, however, defined along geopolitical zones, with some permeating across regional lines. The predominant threat in the north central and northwest regions is armed banditry occasioned by terrorism, while we have the Boko Haram and the Islamic State West African Province issue lingering in the northeast and has remained the main threat in the northeast region. The major threat in the southeast and the southwest has been that of secessionist agitation of the proscribed indigenous people of Biafra and the Yoruba nations, respectively. The South-South region continued to experience oil theft, cultism, and youth restlessness. However, acts of criminalities such as kidnapping, armed robbery, communal clashes, and cattle rustling were common among the 6 geopolitical zones. It is pertinent to point out that most of the security threats in the country were fueled by the proliferation of small arms, and this was exacerbated by the influx of illegal arms and ammunition through our porous borders and the preponderance of local arms fabrication factories in the country. To this end, the armed forces' kinetic and non-kinetic efforts were geared towards tackling these threats in all the geopolitical zones. Now, during the period January to December 2023, troops neutralized over 6,880 terrorists and other combatants across the theaters. Troops arrested over 6,970 persons involved in terrorism and violent extremism. Troops also rescued over 4,480 kidnapped hostages, as well as recovered over 3,300 assorted weapons and recovered over 39,000 assorted ammunition during the year. Additionally, troops recovered over 1 million liters of stolen crude oil, over 6 million liters of illegally refined AGO, otherwise known as diesel, over 3 million liters of DPK, otherwise known as kerosene, and over 3.5 million liters of PMS, otherwise known as petrol. Now to examine the security issues as they have presented themselves in the year, looking at it zone by zone. We will begin with the Northeast geopolitical zone, where the security situation in the Northeast zone can be described as relatively stable, with the predominant security challenge being the Boko Haram and the Islamic State West African Province terrorist insurgency. Now, despite the terrorists being substantially degraded by the military in conjunction with sister services and security agencies, the terrorists have continued to conduct isolated attacks on civilian and military targets, and also resorted to planting improvised explosive devices in order to impede troops' movement. Nevertheless, the military will not rest on its oars, but will continue to review tactics, techniques, and procedures to counter the terrorists. In the first half of 2023, troops consolidated on successes gained in 2022 by dominating the joint operations area. During the period, Operation Desert Sanity and Operation Lake Sanity 2, as well as Operation Mountain Sanity, were conducted with the aim to further degrade the terrorists in their enclaves. And these enclaves are Sambisa Forest, Timbuktu Triangle, Mandara Mountains, and the Lake Chad Tumbus. These operations resulted in the neutralization of the terrorists, destruction of their camps, and the capture of several vehicles, arms, and ammunition. Additionally, many hostages were rescued, while the terrorist freedom of action was curtailed. The terrorist fighting capability was degraded, compelling them to surrender in droves. In the second half of the year, troops' doggedness reduced terrorist activities to ambush against troops and the increased employment of improvised explosive devices. Thus, troops embarked on dismounted operations and farm protection patrols to clear proximate terrorist enclaves. Though the terrorists embarked on disruptive attacks, troops disseminated their fighting force to revive commercial activities, return of local authorities, and internally displaced persons to some localities. These actions translated to increased farming activities in several local government areas in the zone. The fighting capacity of the terrorists was degraded, and is therefore low, owing to ongoing military pressure by troops. Cumulatively, a total of over 105,000 combatants, terrorist combatants, and their families surrendered to troops, while 9 Chibok girls were rescued in different locations across the Northeast Theater. Troops witnessed an evolving adoption of improvised explosive devices tactics by the terrorists. To this end, a total of 151 improvised explosive devices occurrences were recorded in the Northeast within the year. Among these incidents, 30 were on own troops and 43 on civilians. Troops, however, detonated 78 improvised explosive devices during the period. Accordingly, there has been a remarkable improvement in troops' ability to defeat and destroy improvised explosive devices planted by the terrorists. And this has reduced the fatalities on troops. Overall, during the course of the year, troops of Operation Harden Cave neutralized over 1,750 terrorists, recovered over 680 assorted weapons, and over 495,000 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 820 hostages, among others. Let's now cross over to the Northwest. The Northwest zone of the country witnessed threats from armed bandits, terrorists, kidnapping, and illegal levies due to large ungoverned spaces, forest reserves, and hills, which characterize the terrain of the Northwest. Troops observed that the terrorists took advantage of the porosity of northern border and remoteness of the Northwest flashpoints that allowed them to operate. Accordingly, the operational effectiveness of the Northwest Theater was reviewed and strengthened in the first half of the year, with the deployment of additional formations, units, and forward operational bases to boost manpower and seal gaps between deployments. Also, additional force multipliers and enablers, such as mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles and other high-caliber weapons, were injected to boost troops' fighting power. Troops recorded successes based on the operational review which I just described. The terrorists then leveraged on their fluidity and knowledge of the terrain to operate. This situation caused the terrorists to switch tactics, thereby resulting to mass adoptions of villagers and students to generate funds to continue their acts of terror. It will be recalled that on the 22nd of September this year, terrorists abducted 24 students of Federal University Gusau in Zamfara State, out of which 14 were rescued by troops. Troops then coordinated with school authorities across the zone to forge ways to ensure the safety of their students. Ever since, troops have been working assiduously to ensure safety of schools and the recovery of those who are still in the terrorist camp. Furthermore, troops observed that the attacks and abduction of some persons in some isolated communities and towns by terrorists in the northwest zone could trigger an influx of internal displaced persons to perceived safe havens or areas with attendant humanitarian challenges. Troops also observed that the efforts by the terrorists to disrupt farming activities, as well as imposition of levies on some villages before farmers can access their farms, could result in food insecurity, which would negatively impact socio-economic activities in the area. Accordingly, troops emplaced contingencies towards supporting humanitarian relief operations and curb any insecurity as a result of the situation. Overall, during the course of the year, troops of Operation Hadirin Daji neutralized over 1,520 terrorists, recovered over 425 assorted weapons, and 6,900 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 1,100 hostages, among others, while troops of Operation Wildstroke neutralized over 970 terrorists, recovered over 190 assorted weapons, and over 1,600 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 570 hostages, among others. Now, to the North Central geopolitical zone. The North Central zone faced several security threats, with the most prominent being terrorism occasioned by armed banditry, characterized by cattle rustling and kidnapping. Notably, there were noticeable footprints of terrorist activities in the zone, particularly in Kogi and Niger states. While farmer-header clashes were prevalent in Plateau, Benue, Kogi, Nasarawa, and Kwara states. The North Central region also experienced arms proliferation, which served as the propellant for other criminal activities, and this is as a result of the ease of access to these arms stemming from the preponderance of illegal arms fabrication factories in Plateau and Kaduna states. Troops observed that numerous arms merchants operated, particularly from Benue, Plateau, and Nasarawa states. These merchants supplied arms and ammunition to armed groups in their enclaves across the north-central zone. These actions impacted the threat dynamics and disrupted troops' efforts in making the security situation much more appreciable. Nevertheless, troops of Operation Safe Haven and Operation Wild Stroke continued to dominate the zone with the right posture to defeat the threat. In the first half of 2023, significant armed banditry and terrorist activities occurred in some local government areas of Niger State, particularly in isolated communities and highways. The presence of potential hideouts and the constant relocation of these terrorists within the zone contributed to increased armed criminal activities. Equally, ethnic-based crises occasioned by persistent violent attacks and kidnappings were recorded in Plateau State. The ethno-religious volatility in the state defined the threat perception, which is branded with cyclic violence between the locals and those of Hausa Fulani extraction. This situation is prevalent in Barkin Ladi, Bokos, Rio, and Mangu local government area of the state. Meanwhile, a reasonable feat was achieved through robust operational activities to stem the tide of the terrorists operating at the borders between Taraba, Plateau, and adjoining areas in Bauchi State and parts of southern Kaduna. Troops' non-kinetic efforts facilitated several peace initiatives between the farmers and herders, as well as indigenous and settlers. The relentless effort of troops in conjunction with other security agencies checkmated illegal arms proliferation, as well as many factories that were dismantled and the fabricators arrested. Until the recent killings during the Xmas, the highlighted measures visibly contributed to relative peace in Plateau State, as well as the adjoining areas in Bauchi, Taraba, and Kaduna states. Similarly, the activities of Operation Wild Stroke significantly checkmated armed banditry, kidnapping, and other crimes in Benue, Nasarawa, and Taraba states. Our operations resulted in the arrest of several gun runners, kidnappers, militiamen, and other criminals, as well as the recovery of cache of arms and ammunition. Unfortunately, it was discovered that some unscrupulous elements among our troops were part of the illegal arms trading syndicates. While some of them have been arrested and adequately sanctioned, efforts are ongoing to rid the armed forces of other bad eggs wherever they may be. The second half of the year witnessed the conduct of kinetic and non-kinetic operations, which significantly curtailed attacks between farmers and herders in Plateau State. Sadly, events turned gloomy with the attack on Bokos local government area and some parts of Barkinladi local government area on the 23rd of December, some days before Christmas. It should be noted that Bokos and Barkinladi local government areas of Plateau State span about 2,315 square kilometers. And this location has over 350 villages which are mostly dispersed. The distance between some of these villages and troops' location is over 90 kilometers. And sometimes it is difficult to access them because of the rugged terrain, which are mostly inaccessible to vehicles. Thus, when there's an attack, the reaction time for such an incident may be too long, except when there is credible intelligence before such an attack. On the night of the 23rd of December, over 100 marauding armed herders suspected to be mercenaries carried out a series of unprovoked attacks from multiple fronts on a village in Bokos local government area of Plateau State. And this attack occurred while the locals were asleep. The militants unleashed mayhem on the locals before the arrival of troops to the location. Unfortunately also, on the 24th of December, at about 1900 hours, troops received a total of about 36 distress calls from diverse locations simultaneously. The distress calls reported a series of coordinated attacks by suspected herders, militants on the isolated villages in Bokos and parts of Barkinladi local government area of Plateau State. Troops responded to the calls and were able to intervene in 19 villages, forcing the militants to withdraw. Unfortunately, the havoc had been committed before troops could arrive at other villages. Now, Overall, during the course of the year, troops of Operation Safe Haven neutralized over 2,000 terrorists, recovered over 660 assorted weapons, and over 7,300 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 600 hostages, among others. Likewise, troops of Operation Wild Punch neutralized over 870 terrorists, recovered 300 assorted ammunition, and over 1,700 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 530 hostages, among others. Let's now move to the Southwest geopolitical zone. The Southwest geopolitical zone has remained largely calm. Within the year, the zone witnessed cases of armed robbery, illegal arms trafficking, kidnapping, and farmer-herder clashes. It also witnessed violent protests orchestrated by the Central Bank of Nigeria Naira redesign policy and fuel scarcity. Illegal oil bunkering was also a challenge, particularly in the area of Ikorodu, Atlas Cove, Badagry, and Ogere. Additionally, troops deployed to address reports of the migration of terrorists from the northeast and the northwest into the southwest zone, particularly to Osun State. Accordingly, with that report, troops sustained operations in the old Oyo National Park and the Kanji Lake National Park to curb the influx of terrorists from Kogi and Niger states into Osun State. Cyber crimes and drug peddling contributed to the threat picture in the Southwest zone. However, the armed forces, through joint efforts with other security agencies, local authorities, and increased public cooperation in sharing vital information, significantly doused these criminal activities in the zone. Meanwhile, the conduct of Operation Awase and Operation Mensa significantly stabilized the Southwest zone. Now, we can flip over to the Southeast zone. And in the Southeast zone, the predominant security threat remains the nefarious activities of the proscribed indigenous people of Biafra and their Eastern Security Network cohorts, which has increased its employment of improvised explosive devices known as Ogbunigwe. The secessionists carry out attacks on civilians and security personnel, as well as impose illegal sit-at-home order. Furthermore, they preyed on lightly manned checkpoints and outposts to kill security operatives and cut away weapons for their terror activities. Troops unlocked the strategy of the group, which led to the injection of additional manpower, military platforms, and combat equipment into the area. Accordingly, troops' operations largely curtailed the activities of the extremist group through a series of intelligence-based operations to dislocate their influential organizers and their combatants. This stance has forced the extremist group to relocate to the hinterland to evade troops' onslaught. And in the second half of the year, the activities of the group took on another dimension, in which they employed surveillance cameras along the routes to their camps and increased the employment or deployment of improvised explosive devices. The violent extremists then embarked on propaganda tactics to sway gullible citizens for relevance. Notwithstanding, troops are on their trail and gaining the cooperation of stakeholders. Overall, during the course of the year, troops of Operation Udoka neutralized over 460 combatants, recovered over 680 assorted weapons, and over 5,800 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 500 hostages, among others. Now to the South-South geopolitical zone. The security situation in the South-South zone has remained fluid and characterized by cultism, kidnapping, youth restlessness, and robbery. The militancy in the South-South zone has mutated into pipeline vandalism and oil theft. Notably, oil theft in the region continues to afford criminals the resources to fund their operations, whilst constituting huge economic losses to the nation. Relatedly, pipeline vandalism has continued to pose environmental hazard which are affecting the socio-economic setting of the area. Similarly, there are attempts by the indigenous people of Biafra and their Eastern Security Network cohorts to extend their reach into the region with the hope of extending dominance and relevance. Consequently, the Joint Task Force Operation Delta Safe has stepped up offensives to clamp down on illegal oil bunkering and its associated criminal activities. The second half of the year witnessed a noticeable decrease in illegal bunkering activities, which was attested to and commended by the NNPC senior management team. Furthermore, the operationalization of forward operating bases in Sobe and Biase, in Edo and Cross River states, respectively, helped to checkmate criminal activities in the area. Overall, During the course of the year, troops of Operation Delta Safe neutralized over 870 suspected 870 combatants, recovered 300 assorted weapons and 1,731 assorted ammunition. Troops also rescued over 530 hostages, among others. Well, the security situation in the year 2023 has remained fluid, complex, and dynamic, with the threat morphing in form and scale. This unpredictable nature of threats and the attendant demands for stability have continued to pose significant challenges for security forces. Consequently, various forces have continued to evolve tactics, techniques, and procedures to professionally respond to these threats. The armed forces has been developing the desired enablers to overcome the country's numerous threats. Notably, the application of kinetic and non-kinetic efforts in collaboration with other security services and security agencies. This has continued to shape the operating environment in which we are in a dominant position. Additionally, attention has been given to providing relevant resources to enhance troop capacity to defeat these threats. The culminative outcome of these efforts is reflected in increased stability achieved across the various theaters of operation. Troops remain in a dominant position, and we are winning the war. Our priority is the safety and security of citizens, and to secure our citizens and guarantee their security and safety, we cannot do that but to go after terrorists and their cohorts, destroy them, or cause them to surrender wherever they may be. Thank you very much.